So anyway, I have your book here in front of me, The Kidnapping Club, uh,
Very nice.
and I thought it was a beautiful read. I really enjoyed it. So,
Connections between Philadelphia and Boston and New York. And the Underground Railroad was absolutely crucial. We know that in New York City, for example, there are both white and black activists who are forming groups such as the Vigilance Committee, is what they called it. And there were other cities that had vigilance committees, but New York is important here because it really points to the fact that there were folks who were interested in helping Black people escape the worst effects of our political system. I mean, after all, this is the nation's founding document, the Constitution, and in that document, it declares that runaways have to be returned upon the claim of their masters. But I also think, having done a lot of talks, places in the North, there can be an emphasis that I think is somehow a bit misleading, to be honest, when it comes to the Underground Railroad. Because in New York City, for example, there are vast majorities of white folks who are opposed to abolition. They are not believers in racial equality. They have no desire to help people who are accused of being runaways. Um, so I think the emphasis on the Underground Railroad is giving a bit too much credit to white Northerners because so many of them, and perhaps a majority of them, are completely oblivious at best and con sort of co-conspirators at worst in the apprehension of Black folks.
so John, if I could interject or ask a question at this point. So, and we understand that, and some people have said, well, that those weren't my people who did that, but the institution of slavery and kidnapping and putting them back into slavery was beneficial for so many reasons. I'm not saying it's right by any means, but I'm just saying people continued to do it because it was an institution and because of the financial gains that they were receiving by doing it, right? They were motivated by money and wealth, and they were empowered by that as well, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. In New York City, one of the things I try to document in the book, The Kidnapping Club, is the rise of Wall Street and the emergence of a wealthy Manhattan that is, centered around the banking industry and the insurance industry and the shipbuilding industry and the merchants who are outfitting these ships. All of this means that New York City residents are highly dependent on the cotton crop grown in the American South.
Well,
And
even to this area, Connecticut, and then further north, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, so many mills were up here. So, the product was being shipped from where Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, the southern states, regardless, and then brought up here, and that was the raw material that was used to make our clothing and everything else that we have, right?
yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, New Orleans, of course, was the major shipping port. And all of that cotton, millions of bales that are being grown by enslaved people are shipped not only to New England and the mills in Connecticut and Massachusetts, for example, that you mentioned, but also across the Atlantic to England, to
Mm.
places like Liverpool and Birmingham. And so there's a financial incentive on the part of white Northerners to continue prospering from the system of Southern slavery.
Mm.
It's also true that even if you didn't have a financial interest in becoming complicit, you might have a political interest, and that is especially true of New York, because in New York City there's a very vibrant and powerful Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party in New York City is the party, as well as in New England, the political party in this period of American history that is intent on preserving the country's compromises over slavery.
Mm.
They're the ones that are, championing the Union, making sure that the North is fulfilling its responsibilities under the Constitution when it comes to the fugitive slave law. And so there's a political ideology that dovetails quite seamlessly with the financial interests of the North, which also, it needs to be said, dovetails quite seamlessly with the racism that is predominant among white New Englanders and white New Yorkers. So all of that makes it extremely unlikely that slavery was ever going to be ended or toppled without the cost of a deadly civil war.
Well, even if I go to Providence, Rhode Island, or even, just any place, basically, you see these palatial buildings. And if you think about it and do the research and dig a little, you find out it was enslaved people who built these enormous, grandiose structures.
Yeah, Brown University has done a really important reckoning with its ties to the slave trade.
Hmm.
One of its main benefactors was deeply enmeshed in that system. And it's important that we highlight the activists who are fighting against this, right? I mean, not just the black activists like Ruggles and Frederick Douglass, but also
Was
the
it
white
Quakers?
abolitionists.
Quakers, was that largely Society of Friends? Is that who was the big people who stepped up?
That was initially, yeah, that was absolutely true. The movement grows slowly, but pretty dramatically over time, and it's really important to highlight and acknowledge and honor those people, I think. But
Well, acts of bravery for sure, right?
yeah, of course, and people putting their lives on the line. But I just think we also need to remember that that has to be coupled with the fact that they're fighting against tremendous tides of pro-South, pro-slavery
Hmm.
financial interests and political interests. And it just highlights all the more, in my mind, the bravery that these people exhibited. But we can't misunderstand that the minority, the extreme minority of white New Englanders or New Yorkers who cared at all about slavery somehow is able to um, sort of cancel out the fact that there were tremendous forces at work in the North that rendered them complicit in slavery.
So they prevailed, and thank goodness they were able to do that, right? Continue the fight and um, just do the right thing. And of course, I have to draw a parallel between what's happening now with ICE and what happened then 200 years ago, right?
The parallels are so apparent, right, to those of us who know this history. And, sometimes I ask my students, this is often a question I pose to them on the first day of classes at the University of Michigan, why do we study history? And oftentimes students will say, well, we want to learn from our mistakes. And unfortunately, that never happens. So we are doing the same sorts of things here with immigrants and federal power versus state power and sanctuary cities and people fighting against the apprehension of fellow citizens who they know personally from the neighborhood or from some work environment. The parallels are just shockingly apparent, and it just shows that when we look back on these periods of American history and we say, well, thank God we're not holding people in slavery anymore. Thank God we're not treating people so horribly like the Kidnapping Club
We
did.
are.
Yeah, we're doing it all over again, and it's just so distressing for those of us who know our history.
So what do we do, David? Is there an action? Is there, I mean, I know you're a historian, but you're also very bright and forward thinking as well. So what do we do? How do we mitigate the ills of our society? Awareness is one thing, having conversations, you doing these talks. What else? What else can we do?
Yeah, those are absolutely crucial. I think it's important to sort of try to reach audiences that are perhaps not college educated, perhaps audiences that are not necessarily drawn to intellectual debates and podcasts, and in interviews, because the more you know about your history, the more you are aware of some of the same transgressions that people are committing today. And
Mm.
you know, somebody 100 years from now is going to be sitting down like you and I to have a conversation about this era of American history, and they're going to be saying, you know, the same distressing things about how ICE is prevailing over local community norms and laws, reaching into neighborhoods and schools and daycare centers to pull people out of their attempts to make a living or survive. So
Mhm.
we just need to bring attention to it wherever we can and remind folks that we've been here before and it's not a good place to be in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think to your point, it's rigorous work. Whoever does speak out, and what happened to David Ruggles, he only lived to be about 30 years old. Was that right? So
Right.
developed some very severe health issues because he was always out there and doing the work. Right.
Yeah, he gave his life really essentially to fight against injustice. And that's the main reason why I think people should read Graham Hodge's biography. They should do all the research they can. On Lespenard Street in Lower Manhattan, there's a plaque that's devoted to David Ruggles, and you can see on the street where his shop once was. So, yeah, it's important to highlight these figures.
So it's always profit over people, regardless of their rights. Would you like to speak about that?
Unfortunately, that seems to be the case, doesn't it? There's certainly a pattern emerging,
Mm, mm.
has emerged, and you know, for those of us who are aware of this history, we need to do our best to spread this word because sometimes historians talk about the burden of history. You know, when Donald Trump says, "Why are we always talking about slavery?" when they're removing information on websites about Black history or Latino history, when they're attempting to erase what historians have done to recover these marginalized people and their stories, we need to stand up and say, there's a reason why these stories are worth telling. In part because, you know, if we're ever going to live up to our ideals as a country, we need.
Where they were doing it for their own personal profit and, had the bankroll as a result of it, where they'd get money when they took the person they captured and put them back into slavery, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there are certainly some differences, but the similarity is the fact that they're operating under the auspices of a federal government that is determined to exercise its power over state and local authorities, right? So, in the case of the Kidnapping Club, they're operating under the authority of the federal constitutional compromise over slavery, which is in the document originally as the Fugitive Slave Clause. It's reinforced as the Fugitive Slave Act in 1793. And then it's made all the worse in the notorious Fugitive Slave Law of 1850.
Mm,
So these are all federal pieces of legislation that are designed to negate local and state laws that essentially, in the context of the 1830s, are providing sanctuaries for Black people accused of being runaways.
mm,
We didn't use that term back then, sanctuary cities, but that's essentially what they're doing. Places like Boston, for example, made it illegal through the personal liberty laws to use the local jails to house people accused of being runaways. So, you know, people are fighting back. You know, they're standing up for their communities and the people in those communities. On the opposite side of that equation is the federal authority, which is determined in the case of fugitive slave law to uphold North's obligations to return runaways. And of course, the parallels with the modern era, federal authorities are attempting to what they claim is enforcing immigration law.
mm. I wanted to talk to David about, or John, about Seneca Village and what happened and how it became Central Park. It seems a lot like what we do, where people have their homes and their property, and they have their own little gardens and flowers in the yard and that sort of thing. And can we talk about Seneca Village?
Yeah, sure. I would urge your listeners, if they're interested, to check out two books, which are just fantastic resources. One is by Leslie Alexander, and Professor Alexander is really the one who highlights the decimation of Seneca Village, but also the really important long history of slavery in New York City by Leslie Harris. So, in those two books, we learn a great deal about how rich and vibrant that community was in Seneca Village. And there are, strong neighborhood bonds. Children play with each other, in the streets. People go to work, they come home, they have dinner. I mean, not unlike what many of us experience today. Unfortunately, the callousness with which New York City treated Black New Yorkers during the era of the Kidnapping Club is repeated in the 1850s when the city essentially destroys Seneca Village, this vibrant Black neighborhood, to build Central Park. And Central Park is a wonderful resource for the city today. But so many of the things that we enjoy or appreciate about our American culture today have a history that would give us pause were we fully aware of what was behind them.
I agree. Even if I go to Wilcox Park over in Pawcatuck and it's like just right on the border, and see that, I see, wow, that was those were enslaved people that helped to build that park over there. So it just makes you think a little bit more. So how do you do this? Newspapers.com was something I saw that, and court records. So that really takes a sleuth, I think, to be able to come up with methods to disclose and discover all of this information that you find.
Yes, what's been rendered a great deal easier for the historian of 19th century America is the digitizing of so many of these resources.
Hmm.
So until relatively recently, you would have to, travel across the country at great expense to try and discover which libraries had which newspapers or which letters or which diaries. And so, there's still a lot of opportunities to travel to places like the New York Historical Society, New York Public Library, the Boston, the Athenaeum. There's so many great resources that are still available to historians, but they can be supplemented with these remarkable digitized resources. Unfortunately, most of them are behind a paywall.
Hmm.
So you have to be affiliated with the university, you have to be a professor or a student, or you have to cough up a substantial amount of money to access many of these. But you're absolutely right. The newspapers are crucial. I relied on Ruggles's accounts, very detailed accounts of the Kidnapping Club activities in the Mirror of Liberty. But also, there were other papers published by Black Northerners in this period, Frederick Douglass's North Star, and then later on Frederick Douglass's paper. There was as early as 1837 a newspaper published in New York City by Black folks. So between the newspapers that are available, the letters, the diaries, the government documents, these are all really valuable resources for uncovering the truth
Hmm.
of this period.
What do you think about artificial intelligence?
Oh, geez. That's a very fraught question for professors these days, as it is for the rest of the world. So I think, in some ways it can help with research. And I would, often encourage my students to use AI to help with research. It can help you identify the resources that are available around certain events. But where it crosses the line, in my mind at least, into impropriety is when it's used to do the writing. And I really discourage as much as I can my students from using AI to write essays, to write papers, because it's only with the coalescing of the materials, it's with the you know aggregating of the stories that you actively engage with the materials and turn it into a story or an essay or a book. And so, yeah, that's there are certainly some uses to it, but there are also lines that can be crossed as well.
Well, I think definitely, and I think that, as far as brainwave activity, you're going to see that uh, you can, the brain is activated when you do the work and you make the connections. But, as far as some access to some of the information, it seems like if artificial intelligence, have you done any searches to see how AI would compare to like some of the work and research that you've done and just to see the truth of it? Do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I mean, we have well documented instances of AI basically making up sources and getting things wrong, like dates and events that are important to telling a story. But I haven't used it very much. But to the extent that I have, I've seen the ways in which it could be used to collate or bring together different timelines or different resources that are available to scholars. Um, but yeah, I think we're going to have to be very diligent about making sure that if and when AI is given the ability to, write a book or write a story or write an essay about a particular event, that it's told accurately.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that we're going to have to due diligence on that even more than we think we will, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, what else? Any other recommendations I think that you would like to put out there? Oh, one thing that's kind of interest to me is the competition, I guess, between blacks and the Irish working class. Can you speak about that for maybe a minute?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I had mentioned a few minutes ago the fact that the Democratic Party is very powerful in New York City. And the power of that political party before the Civil War comes in no small part to the fact that Irish working class men have joined the party and see the Democrats as their allies. And consequently, the flip side of that is they see first the Whig Party, but then even more so the Republican Party as it's born in the 1850s as to some extent, a party that is open to questioning the legitimacy of slavery. They see the Republicans as the enemy. And it's one of the reasons why we see the draft riots, so-called, in July of 1863, when there are members of the Irish working class parading and marauding through the streets of Manhattan and rebelling against what they believe is now a war, a civil war to end slavery, which is, from the perspective of many of the Irish working class, not something they had signed up for. They were entirely supportive of this notion that we were going to fight the Civil War to end the rebellion in the South, to end the Confederacy and bring the Union back together. But after the Emancipation Proclamation is issued in September of 62, that changes the direction of the war and suggests that one of the consequences of the war is going to be the end of slavery. And that is not something that the Irish working class had signed up for.
Hmm.
So, there's a fraught, very deeply troubled history when it comes to the Democratic Party in antebellum New York City, the Irish working class, that is an important constituency for that party. And the extent to which people are unwilling to fight on behalf of the end of slavery or fight on the behalf of Black civil rights,
Hmm. Hmm.
even in the middle of the war, right? I'm not
Hmm.
talking about 1830, I'm talking about 1863.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. Well, it's such a compelling story. I think you've opened up my eyes even wider and you've given us some more things to read. So, thank you so much for your time, John. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your knowledge, your information, your ability to share and to kind of get the word out there. And, you think if we knew better, we'd do better, but we do know. But yeah, the path, I think, to justice is fraught with lots of struggles, right? So,
Mhm.
kudos
Indeed.
to people like you and to David Ruggles for the work that he did and the work that you continue to do. And it's too bad he died young. And We know Jim Crow had children and grandchildren, but David Ruggles never became a father, did he?
No, he
Yeah,
didn't. Yeah.
yeah. And then do you think there's anybody in our society today, in our world today, who would is our current David Ruggles? Do you think we have anybody who, yeah, you think we have some?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think there are always people in every era that are able to step beyond their own self-interest and see the broader injustice that's going on.
Hmm.
And that's why these people then and now are worth highlighting and celebrating. And often they're the same people like Ruggles who literally put their lives on the line to make a society that's better for all of us and certainly better for our children and grandchildren.
Hmm.
So I'm sure, yeah, there are lots of David Ruggleses out there, some of whom will remain unheralded, some of them will attract the interest of future historians. But the reason is because they're able to step out of their own personal predicament or situation and see society and see the injustices for what they are.
Exactly. So I think to some extent we all need to get comfortable with being a little uncomfortable and doing the right thing, right? Taking care of our neighbors, taking care of those who have less or those in need, right?
Indeed.
Okay.
And Thanksgiving is coming up, so it's a perfect opportunity, not only to do the hard work in your communities, but also around the dinner table when somebody says, "Well, slavery wasn't that bad," or "Why we always have to bring up the worst stories of the past." And we have to remind ourselves it's not to create a set of victims or villains. It is the very hard reason of we have to do better. We have to have a more just and kinder and empathetic society. Unfortunately, in some quarters of our political culture today, the word empathy seems to be attracting negative connotations, which I think is a harbinger for the end of civilization. Because
Hmm.
if it's not for empathy, we don't understand what people have gone through in the past, and that blinds us even more to the struggles that people are going through today.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, and without the hurt, the heart is hollow, right? We need to understand our own pain and understand the pain of others. So, yeah, exactly. Well,
Thank
thank
you so much for having me.
Oh, you've been an amazing guest. I really appreciate your patience with me getting set up and having this conversation. So, thank you so much, and good luck with your continued endeavors. And someday, hopefully, we can meet. And we had slaves in East Lyme, so
Mhm.
it just changes your vision on whatever it is that you see or think about. So, you take care. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Bye bye.
Bye.